at the end of last year, he reached out to me to ask me if I can do this. So again, we're really excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen and let me know when you guys can actually see my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So I want to first of all emphasize that when I do these kind of things, I like to think of it as an interactive thing. So I don't want to just be showing slides and doing this demo and talking to you. I'd like to engage in conversation. So when I say that, I'm really saying, please feel free to stop me and ask questions. Also, if you do have questions and you want to type them in the chat, David and Colin are going to be moderating the chat, so they may be able to answer them as well. But let's make this a discussion. I'm sure that you guys didn't just come here to hear my voice, so let's do that. A little bit about myself. So I, as I mentioned, recently started at DRofus last November, but before that, I was actually a customer. So my background is in architecture, went to school for architecture, and then kind of over time transitioned to a design technology role. And really, my interest is how we can work smarter, not harder, and be as most efficient. As you guys all know, the scope of architects continues to increase. Client expectations continue to increase with every new technological advancement. It used to be before that renderings were something that maybe was an add-on. Now that's like baseline and kind of expected. And as we continue to advance, and people see what is possible, they want more and more. So really and truly, how we can use technology to kind of guide that and enable ourselves to be a little bit easier and better, I think is important. And it really comes down to transforming the pen strokes that we put on paper into buildings. One thing I will also just mention is that I am using multiple monitors. So if you see my head turn or glaze, I'm not ignoring you guys. I'm just looking at a monitor that is on the other side of me here. For today's presentation, what we will do is just give you kind of an overview of DRofus, and then I'll get into a little bit of a demo where we talk. But a couple of learning objectives just to kind of understand what we're doing and what DRofus is. So we're a planning and data management software, but ideally we're using this tool to bring the team together and to try to break down some of the barriers that we see in construction. So I'm not going to read verbatim the learning objectives there, but just really understanding how we can try to kind of make data accessible, why it's important that as a project team, we can have an environment that can maintain multiple sources of data, how we can start to transition data between different platforms and even access it, and then also how we can control that data, because some people may need to view it, some people may need to edit it, where we are and how we want to view that data. Those are really important things. Just a little bit about DRofus as a whole. We are a part of the Nemechek Group, so I'm sure that there are several platforms on here that you are familiar with. But yeah, we are a part of that group, and we're continuing to try as we can to reach out to all software. And we know one of the main reasons that we do that is by the fact that we are starting to do a lot of work with IFC. And so IFC is a great means of being able to get information from other design authoring platforms into DRofus. We do have plugins for Archicad and Revit by default also, just for the kind of general platforms that we have. But again, open information is really important to us. So supporting IFC is a great way for doing that. Just so a couple of the customers that we have, this is a list, and there's some big ones that aren't on this list here, such as like kind of Amazon and Kaiser Permanente. What I think you can gather from this is that we have customers that are owners, we have customers on the design side, as well as the construction side. So again, really encompassing all facets of the AEC industry. There's something that DRofus can probably do for you. And likewise, we are a core planning software, but we do a whole lot more, which you'll see in a second, which means that we can pretty much be used in any sector. Now, there are some features that kind of make it favorable to certain sectors, again, that we'll point out, but really we see it being used across the spectrum. And so why DRofus? When we start to talk to our customers and to architects, engineers, designers, contractors, and owners, one of the things that we hear is that there's tons of information on a project. But I'm sure you guys are well aware that that information can be siloed. That silo can exist between the design team and the multiple partners that are on the design team. That can exist between the owner and the contractor. It can even exist on the same team where you have designers that perhaps are responsible for one portion of a building and they're not talking to designers that are on the other portion of the building. So when we have that siloed information, another issue that we run into is wasting time trying to find out where is the latest, and then also who should I be sharing it with and where do I put it. Then when it comes to the client requirements, we may start off with a brief and we start off with a program, and we start to go to meetings, and over time those requirements change, and that could be impacted by a client request, that could be impacted by budget, several different things. But we still at the end of the construction want to make sure that we're delivering what the client is asking for. So how can we continuously take a look at what those requirements are and then validate the design against that? And in that process of doing that validation, it's of course time spent checking our models. So for example, to make sure that we have the right equipment in a particular room. And that might be some of the quantitative things, but then there's also the qualitative things that we have. And again, all of that is information that is in some form or the other that we need to be able to check and verify. And then finally, we have to pull this all together. And for any of you that are familiar with doing things like room data sheets, and also, again, some of the certain reports, we're starting to see, again, with the prominence that data is taking, we're starting to see a lot more owners are asking for information in the form of an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file or something like that. So if you have a really large building, you have to do a lot of formatting and everything, it can be really time consuming to just manage the amount of data and then get it into an output that somebody can easily access. And then of course, we have to manage the money spent making the changes. So you'll hear me talk about DRofus being a database and how we manage data. But really and truly, when we say data, it boils down to a lot more than the ones and zeros, okay? So all of the various things that you guys are used to using on a day-to-day basis, whether that's the program, that's the Excel spreadsheet, it's the sketches that you start to do, it's the budget that's put together, all of these represent project data, okay? Almost think of it as kind of what you have in your notebook or your kind of just collection of things for a project. More importantly, that data is knowledge, and there's expertise that can relate, and sometimes that expertise stays in somebody's head, or if it doesn't get distributed to everybody, we start to struggle. So, again, as a project manager, if there's a lot of information that I had in my head when I came back from a meeting, but I don't share that with the client team, then the client team can start to struggle. So how can we make sure that this data is available and that data turns into knowledge which we can use to design the building and meet the client requirements that we have? So when we think about the value of DRofus as a team, one of the things that we can be is that single source of data or knowledge, or a single source of truth. And that source of truth can encompass a number of different things. So it can be validating the models that we build, managing the program, printing the reports and drawings based off of all that information, or again, as I mentioned, starting to extract data to build those spreadsheets that we can even eventually take into something like a Power BI dashboard. But the sooner we get that information out of people's heads, the better. And because we're cloud-based, we can start to have that information be accessed anywhere. So it can be on the desktop client. We have the plugin, as I mentioned, for Archicad or Revit. We also have a web app, so you can do that on your iPad or a mobile device. And then also, again, as I mentioned, data visualization is becoming a really big thing. So being able to extract that data out and put it into a project dashboard through Power BI. I want to pause here just for a second and make sure, are there any questions or comments, or does that sound good to everyone so far?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, All right, so how does this work? Okay, so at the center of everything that we do in DRofus is the room, okay? And this is something that will be part of your program and is really used throughout the building's life cycle. And in that room, you're going to start to get certain properties, such as the name of the room, the number, and the program area. And again, typically you'll get that from a program that you'll work out, and that really starts to form the basis and the container for a lot of the information that we have. So now within that room, there are going to be certain requirements, which we'll refer to as room data. And these can be based on, the design requirements or the functional requirements from a room. So you start to think of everything from the occupancy count, door hardware, daylighting requirements, all of these kind of the qualitative features we refer to as room data. And you'll see there that, again, we kind of have some subsets of that room data that we have mentioned. After that, we may start to talk about the quantitative aspects of a room when it comes to things that we refer to as item list. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but these item lists basically start to parse out the responsibility and plan for everything that goes into a room. And that can be a TV on the wall, that can be the paint on the wall, or it can kind of be the equipment or furniture that makes up that room. So in this case, in this conference room, you got your conference room table and chairs, you got some AV equipment, all of this, and even up to the kind of the MEP stuff if we wanted to, kind of forms the basis for what we refer to as items that then go on our item lists. We also have systems. Now, systems aren't room specific, but there are certain parts of a system that are planned in rooms, such as diffusers or lights, that get hooked up to then a bigger kind of system of that serves the MEP purposes of a building. And they are connected to things like the air handling units or electrical panels. So again, we do have the opportunity to kind of define these as systems. So when we put this all together, we in essence now have a complete picture of everything that is required to plan, design, and manage a room based on the collective data, or again, the knowledge of the various stakeholders. And as I mentioned, some of this information may be coming from multiple parties. So it can be coming from the design team, it can be coming from the owner, and eventually it can be coming from the contractor. Okay. Want to again pause briefly here. Any comments or questions? Is this all making sense? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. So one of the great features of DRofus is our templates module. So if we think about all the things that I just mentioned that kind of make up a room, and we look at the room data and then the item lists, you can imagine at a project where we have a room type. So for example, in a hospital or healthcare facility, we may have a patient bedroom. And that patient bedroom is going to, we may have 30, 40 of them, and it's going to have the same requirements. Well, we wouldn't want to be maintaining and managing the requirements on a one-by-one basis. So this is where templates can basically come in, or we can start to identify the room data requirements, the item list requirements, put that all together for our typical room types, and then put that into a template. And then once we have that template, we can apply that template to rooms. And the great thing about that is that eventually is if we need to make a change in the template, we can control that, do that in one place, and then make sure that that change is then repopulated to all the rooms where that template has been applied. So again, on projects that have a lot of repetitive room types, for example, healthcare, education, or hospitality, this is a really powerful feature. So before we dive into the demo, I want to talk a little bit about how we form our projects in DRofus. So at the start, you can think of the project where we will define things like the design narratives or the overall kind of building requirements, okay? After that, you'll hear me talk about function structure. Think about things such as departments or sub-departments. So for example, in the department intensive care unit there are actually 2 sub-departments of cardiovascular and neonatal. And then at the most granular level, we have our rooms. And again, those rooms form kind of the container, which then includes everything for our item lists as well as our room data requirements. And those item lists are then made up separately of items. And you can think of that as a separate pieces of equipment or furniture or everything that go into there. So while we're doing that, we can then eventually connect to your models to then inform the design and constantly validate the requirements that we have outlined. And again, whether that's the room data requirements or the item list requirements. So DRofus is built on a collection of modules that support various workflows on a project. So we're not going to discuss all of these today, but these are some of the ones that we do have. And if in the future there is a specific interest about a module that I don't discuss, let us know and we can follow up with additional information. But basically, as we kind of are saying, and from the previous thing that we had, you'll start to see the modules that we'll look at today. And these are some of the things that we'll also see in the demo. And you can see how the modules that we have start to relate to some of the things that I was discussing. So for example, the ability to use the templates kind of goes with the fact that you might have client design standards. So the hospital that you're working for already knows what it expects in terms of a patient bedroom. The rooms, that basically is going to start to form our functions to do our program. The items module, that's where each piece of equipment or furniture that we have that will eventually populate to put into rooms goes. We have a kind of a separate module actually for finishes that works very similarly to how we have items. Our BIM module is in essence the plugin that will work with Revit or Archicad to help us start to validate models. And then our reporting model allows us to do things such as room data sheets. And we can also do Excel exports, again, in terms of being able to take that information out of the database and put it into the hands of people either as a PDF or as an Excel file or CSV file that they're going to use for something else. All right, so if at this point, again, I'll pause and see, do we have any further questions or comments? And if not, I will just kind of jump into the demo. So far, so good? Man, you guys are really quiet. I hope I'm not boring and making you guys fall asleep. All right, so what I'll first just start to show here is the DRofus client. So as I mentioned, we do have a desktop client. I'll show you a little bit about the web in a second. And then there's a plugin for DRofus and Revit. And I'll just start by, typically when we have a project as a welcome screen, you can get some information about who's been logging into the database. So as we talk about understanding, roles and permissions and everything, just a quick thing here, being able to see who's logged into the database of late is really important. You'll get a bit of key data about the project and how that is progressing. And then you'll start to see, based on some of the modules we have, like how many rooms are in the database, how many items have been placed, et cetera, like that. And then again, we have the various modules that break down on our left-hand side. So if I just start taking a look at the rooms module, earlier I mentioned that we had kind of the function structure. So in this project that I have here, this is my function structure, which is made up of these departments. This project per se doesn't actually have any sub-departments, just departments. And so if I highlight a department here, I'll start to see all of the rooms that are associated with this particular department. If I go back and highlight the main department here, I can basically start to see all of the rooms that are in here, okay? Now, at a department level, some of the things that we might want to track are things such as areas. So what I can actually do here is we have a little sub window, and I can start to see at a level, the department for accounting has 3 rooms in it. As part of my overall program, I may know I have a target for specific rooms. And then once we start to design, that's going to be the actual. So we kind of refer to those as the programmed area and the net room area in DRofus. So you can see here, really, I can start to do quick comparisons to see how I'm going about in terms of tracking my program versus what I've actually designed. And so that's something that we can easily do. And again, a lot of this information we can take and put into a report, or we can export into Excel. But we can really start to see here how we're keeping track based on what we're supposed to be doing, okay? If we needed to as well, I haven't done it for this particular thing, but we know that sometimes when we talk about these numbers, these are net numbers. And if you have a really large department, you might start to have circulation and stuff that you'll have to account within that department. So we do have the ability to apply things such as grossing factors and everything like that. So I knew what my net area was, and then I applied a grossing factor to account for interdepartment circulation. We could do that. We could even then start to apply a grossing factor at the overall building level to perhaps account for maybe MEP spaces or shafts or any of that kind of thing, the thickness of your exterior walls, etc. So we have that flexibility to be able to do that to make sure that we're kind of keeping track of the numbers that we have. Want to pause. Any comments, questions? Making sense? Yep. Okay. Then, as I mentioned, if I'm looking at a department at my lowest level, I have my information for rooms, okay? So then once I start to go here to my room, you'll start to see that we have all these, what we call kind of our core property fields that are available. And so, you know, the name of the room, we can provide things such as a room description. One of the interesting things I know going back in my days as an architect is that we'll start our process with the design and we will assign room numbers. And when you get to about 95% DCDs, the contractor's already on board. The MEP guys have panels, electrical panels that are associated with the rooms and everything like that. The owner comes in and the person that's responsible for their room numbers says, oh, these are the new room numbers that we have, and now we need to change everything, which of course can wreak havoc. So we actually have multiple fields that we can control room number so that maybe what we're using during the design or construction side we can have, but then we can apply that owner room number so that there's information that they need, reports that they need, that number shows up. So again, it just kind of gives us that flexibility because it can be a mess at 95% CDs if you've been referring to this room for, you know, a really big project as room 226, and then all of a sudden that room is now CEO 45, you know, that can cause all sorts of problems and issues, okay? We have the ability to add in information such as notes, and I'll get back to kind of some groups in a second, but then we also have the information here related to programmed and area. So again, the programmed is what I kind of put in, and then based on the connection for the room that's actually in Revit, I get that designed area. Okay. Now, when I start to look at rooms, and I mentioned before that we have information related to the quantitative and qualitative, I'm going to just take a look at my lounge here. And you see, when I open up that lounge and we talk about DRofus being a source of truth, that means that we could have lots of different things of information in here. So if I look at that room data, we can see this perhaps as kind of those kind of qualitative requirements for a room. So here, you know, the description of activities and functions that we have in that particular room. There's information here about occupancy. When is the room going to be used and what is the maximum occupancy? And these tabs here, we do have default tabs, but then these are customizable for your project. So if there's information that you need to keep and do and see, we can start to develop this to respond to your particular needs. Another tab that we have in here relates to construction, access, you know, mechanical. So again, all of these can be different requirements. And then now where we refer to this as a source of truth, as an architect, I might be responsible for one or two tabs, but then I want to see the other tabs and not edit those. So using things like permissions, we can say that right now I'm in here as an admin, so I can basically edit and do anything. But you do have the opportunity where perhaps the mechanical, plumbing, and electrical for me were read only, and then my mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineers have right access to that so that everybody can be on the same page and we can make sure that people are seeing the various information because, you know, the MEP guys, especially, some of the electrical stuff for loads and everything is going to be based on the mechanical equipment that's in the building. So having the ability to kind of see that information and understand it, you have. Now, we also mentioned that, you know, again, as a source of truth, we want to be able to accommodate multiple file formats. So what we have the opportunity to do is, based on the Revit model, I've actually been able to push in to this a couple of diagrams here. So we have a floor plan of this specific room, as well as a reflected ceiling plan. And we're not just limited to images that come from our Revit model, but if we have kind of a thought or a feel about how this is going to look from a perspective, we can kind of also include that information, okay? Similarly, we can do things such as documents. So this is a document here that is related to education spaces and properties and thoughts about how we should do lounges and everything. So again, as a source of truth, I can have that in here, and then anybody that's kind of looking at this and understanding and wanting to understand more about some of the things that Technion thinks we should do in terms of kind of lounge spaces, we have this. So as a single source of truth, using that to kind of capture everything. Okay. So we talked about some of those qualitative requirements. We talked about images and documents. Now, when we get into kind of the furniture for this particular room here, I can start to see that I have a lounge seating arrangement. And again, I can come in here and I can start to plan what are the requirements for furniture for this room. And there's multiple ways that we can do that, but just as an example. And again, these are basically what we were referring to earlier as our item lists. We can customize and create this depending on what you want. So sometimes we have item lists that are, specific to a particular discipline or multidiscipline. So we might have one for equipment, and that might be stuff related to maybe AV. You'll see that there was a specific one here for doors or finishes. We haven't populated these. That's why you're not seeing anything. But again, we have the ability to kind of customize this to your project. Okay. And then just as an example of an output for that, this here is a room data sheet, again, that can start to kind of report some of the requirements that I've had for this room. So again, some of those qualitative requirements that we had here. We then start to see the furniture and the item list, but then we can also print that report so we can get some floor plans and also that view there. All right. I want to pause here for a second. Any questions, comments? Nope. Okay. So then I'll basically go on to, we can do the same thing for items. And so what you can basically do is build a library of all the equipment, furniture, etc. that you're going to start to use on your project. And DRofus can kind of house that information for you. There's numerous ways that we can work to kind of get that information in, and I'll show that in a second when we start to look at Revit. But again, if I look at this chair here, again, I can see that the same way that we kind of have those qualitative requirements for a particular room, we can get requirements for the chair. So I can kind of get an overall description of what this chair is. I can get information about size and location. And then also, in this case, this is based on a Marcel Breuer chair here. I can start to get images related to that. And similarly, I can pull up and do what we call an item data sheet and look at that. And in this case, get some of that information here. And I can even start to, and this is when you can start to come in to think about pricing and everything and ordering, I can start to say, where actually on this project has this particular chair been used? And it's actually telling me the names of the rooms where that chair has been used, okay? And then again, I can print that out and get a data report of that chair, okay? The other thing I'll draw your attention to here, I'm in the desktop client that I was just showing you. This is another project, but we do have, as I mentioned, the DRofus, you can do it through a web browser, again, which then means that you can open this up to be on your iPad or your phone. And we're starting to see a lot of people doing this. We're expanding our capabilities for what you can do in the web. It doesn't quite match the client yet. But one of the things that you can also start to do is that you can hook up an IFC model. So this is another project here where we actually have hooked up an IFC model. And so what that allows me to do is looking at this specific room and seeing that room. And then again, this is basically my items in rooms, so my item list. And I can actually see pieces of equipment that are associated with this particular room, okay? So that flexibility of being able to not just be in the client, but be in the web, and now you can start to take a look and do things there. Before I move on to the Revit plugin, any comments or questions?
I'll have questions later for the owner perspective, but
okay,
don't want to slow you down.
All right, great. I will now switch over to, oh, actually, I'm sorry, there's one more thing that I just wanted to show while I am demoing the client here. So as I mentioned, the ability to control access to data and everything can be really very important. So I actually have 2 sessions of the client open here right now, and I am in my items module. And I just wanted to show you that right now, within this particular project, we have 8 items that have been loaded, okay? And I can tell by looking at the item number, I can see where these pieces of equipment come from. So they're in the item, what we call item groups. There's a couple in there for interiors, and there's some for equipment and furnishings. But from a permissions perspective, what we can do is start to limit how people see things and what they see, and then also their ability to edit that information. So if I also just go back to my rooms module right now, you see that I have the ability here to add rooms and basically influence and change. I can even delete, which has an impact on our program. We may not want everybody that's part of the project team to be able to do that. So I'll just show you. I also have here on this project, I'm logged in with another user. So think of this as another user. And you can see that when I come to this user here in my rooms now, you'll see that my ability to edit or delete or anything like that related to rooms is gone, okay? So I can still see the rooms and I can take a look at the information that is in those rooms if I wanted to. But I can't, you'll notice here, I can't actually edit and change anything here because based on the permissions that I have now, okay? But I can still see everything, which is still important. Likewise, if I go over to my items module here, you'll now see that I have the project highlighted, and I'm actually only seeing 4 items. That's again, because of the permissions that I have, we can actually start to control which of the groupings that you see. So in this case here, I can see the equipment and furnishings grouping, but if I go to the interiors grouping, I can't see anything. That doesn't mean that it's not there. It's just that my permissions don't allow me to kind of see that information. So if you think about your project team, there's people that are going to be responsible for specific scopes and disciplines and everything like that. And we can, again, kind of limit that information completely so they don't see anything, or we can even do it to a part where they can at least see it, but they can't edit it, which is extremely important. All right, so now I will go over to Revit, and you'll see when we do have Revit installed and we are connected to a project, we actually install our own tab here up at the top. So we'll have the DRofus tab. And once we are connected, what I can see is I'm going to just start to take a look at here and see that if I highlight a particular room, we also provide our own DRofus properties tab that gets nested into the overall Revit tab here. So when I start to look at this, I can start to see now that this room has been basically, in essence, connected to my program. So what that now means is that if I make any changes to this room, so for example, in the area by adjusting or moving a wall, that information via a sync can actually start being updated inside of the DRofus client. So you'll remember that earlier we had that programmed area versus our designed area. So basically, the actual area that we're reporting as that designed area is based on the geometry of this room with respect to how the walls are kind of placed. And as we take a look at this kind of our properties panel here, we can also start to have some clues about where information is coming from. So we do have the ability to bidirectionally transfer information between DRofus and Revit. And in this case, I have actually pushed information such as the room name and the room number, and I can see that blue arrow pointing to the left that is telling me that that is information that is being taken from the Revit model and pushed into the DRofus database. I can also do the reverse if I wanted to, where I can take information from the DRofus database and push it into the model. And we control that through something that we call attribute configurations. So again, that opens up a whole ton of possibilities about being able to have people that perhaps are not necessarily using Revit, but are in DRofus. If the information is pushed, they're able to see it, or vice versa. People that are, for example, just working in Revit and assembling the models, but maybe not necessarily doing any of that planning, they're also able to start to see that information. And if I scroll down here, I can get a couple of more of these things that happen here as well, such as like, obviously the areas and everything like that are coming from our Revit model and going into the DRofus database. So we started to talk about requirements for a room. So in the DRofus, we saw in terms of room data, those kind of qualitative requirements. But when it comes to the quantitative requirements, this is where we can start to kind of look at validation. So I have the opportunity here to click this little button here that says items in room. And what this is basically showing us is that in the case of this particular room, we have 3 columns. So the preview, Revit, and DRofus. And what we can do is that inside of DRofus, based on my item list, I can start to plan and say what is required for this particular room. And then once I do that, if I have connected the families in my Revit model to the items in my DRofus database, I can then start to make a comparison. So what you're actually seeing here in this case is that in terms of doors, I have said in DRofus, I need 1 door. And basically in this room right now, it is 1. So it is actually matching. Likewise, this arrangement I have here of tables and chairs, I needed 15. And then inside of the inside of Revit, I have 15. So right now, this is a good example of me validating and meeting the requirements for this particular room. And we have the opportunity to do that for any of the families that you have inside of your Revit model, as long as we then create an item or equivalent inside of DRofus. So in this case, what I'm seeing here is that a ceiling has been placed inside of this room, but I actually haven't given it an equivalent in DRofus as yet as an item. And so that's why you're seeing the not linked. Okay. So let's go to another room here, take a look. And I'll come to, you'll see that in here, I have kind of multiple instruction rooms here. And so if I look at this instruction room, and I go ahead and take a look here now, you'll start to see that I've met my requirement for doors, but I have not met my requirements for the TVs, the furniture, or the tablet armchairs. And so again, because we have this connected and Revit knows the families that are associated with the DRofus items, I can come in here and I can just start to hit place. It will basically then select that family, and then I can come in here into my model and I can just start to place that information. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to tell you exactly where it is going to go in the room, but we can tell you what is supposed to go in the room. And so then as I start to place those TVs, you'll see now that instead of being red, it's gone because I have actually now matched the requirements. And I can do that same thing here with the desk. And I can come in here and place the desk. And then as I continue to kind of update this and make the changes, this will update inside of here, okay? All right, so we do have a question here from Bethany, which is a great question. What if I tried to place the element into wrong room? Will DRofus warn me? Okay, so let's just use basically this furniture, the tablet armchair as an example. Okay, so I'll click place, but instead of placing it in the instruction room, I'll place it in the conference room. And if I do that, basically this hasn't updated. Okay, so that's a key to me that clearly I have placed this in the incorrect room. That's a good segue into another thing that we can do, where now if I look at this conference room and I look at it you'll see that we have a door and we have this chair. And right now, this is not planned in DRofus. But let's say that I wanted to start placing the equipment in here. What I can basically do is hit this little button here that says update DRofus. But before I do that, what I'm actually going to do is let's just, let's do this. I can highlight this room here and I can actually hit this little button and say open in DRofus, and it will automatically take me to that one room, okay? And if I open up this one room and I can look at my furniture requirements and I can see that actually there is nothing right now. So I can come back and I'll go back to show this room in DRofus. And I'll basically say that I'm gonna, let's just take a couple of more of these chairs. This is probably not the best chair to use in this room, but I'll just add a couple more. So we'll have 3 of these. Come in here now, and I can actually basically say update DRofus, which is basically saying I'm going to use this as a basis for building the requirements for the item list in the client. So I'll say yes. So I'll get that match there. And now, if I take a look at that room, oops, sorry, I need to refresh it. Where did my room go? Hold on one second. Why is that not updating? That should have updated to allow me to see that I'm meeting the requirements for that room as I specified inside of DRofus. I may have something blocking that based on some testing that I have, so I apologize for that. But you will be able to. So to answer your question, it will let you know that you kind of have made a mistake. One thing I'd also like to mention too here now is that earlier, as I mentioned, that we can do something with templates. So you can see that I can start to build the requirements for each room on a one-to-one basis. But because I have a lot of instruction rooms inside of this project, I can actually create a template. And so if I go back to the DRofus client and I take a look at our templates module, you'll see here that what we can do is start to build templates. So in this case, I built a template for instruction rooms. And again, that template can start to have information here. I can have room data that's applied to it. I can have the furniture requirements for that particular room as it relates to the equipment and doors and so on. And then what that basically allows me to do is that now I can come here and I can look, for example, for all the instruction rooms inside of my project. And where necessary, I can start to highlight these rooms. And what I'll do right now is that's kind of based on the instruction room that is around 500 square feet in area. So now, instead of having to go room by room and basically create the room requirements for that room, I can come in here and I'll select this one room here. And I'll basically say that I want to apply that template. And I'll apply my instruction room template and hit select. And I'll click OK. So now all of the requirements for that particular room have been applied via the template. And of course, let's say that over time, there are changes to that template. All I need to do is come in here and update my template. So for example, I can come in here and maybe say that this occupancy is actually going to be 12. So I'll save that and I'll close. Make sure that I refresh my environment. And now if I go and look at any particular, again, sort here by name, and then I'm going to go and take a look at one of those instruction rooms where I've applied that template. and I can see that change has been made. What you will also see is this little blue bar here telling me that all the requirements for this room are being driven by the template. So I can actually come in here and start to edit these values. What I need to do is I need to actually edit the template. So again, this gives us the power of being able to control. And if I needed to, I could come right here, make an edit to that template, and then it will update this. We can also then run into situations potentially where we may start a room with a particular template, but let's say that there's a deviation. For example, perhaps there is a column in this room, or maybe because it's on the corner, it's a little bit bigger, and we have the opportunity to get some furniture, additional furniture or chairs in there. We do have the ability to do what we call derived templates. And so what that means in essence is that we can start to take certain parts of the template that we want to maintain and be the same for all instruction rooms and keep them. But then we can go to a particular field or whatever and say, actually, you know what, for this particular instance, we want to change the value, okay? So as an example, let's say that I wanted to do this for that particular room. So what I'm going to say is that in the case of this particular room, if I go to look at the template, again, I'll just start look at the template so we can see. When I come to look at the furniture, there's a quantity of 12 chair tablet arms, okay? I'm going to say that, you know what, for this particular instance, I'm going to override that, and I'm going to say that I need to do a different value for this one particular room. So if I do that now, and I go to this room, you'll note now that I can come in here, I can come in here and I can make a change to that quantity. Why is that not letting me change it? Sorry, 1 second. David, any thoughts on what's going on there?
I don't actually. I didn't see what happened.
Sorry.
Apologize.
Yeah. Okay, but we do have that functionality to be able to do that so that you can kind of control this on a case-by-case basis. I'm not quite sure. Why is that not updating?
Did you hit edit items or open item?
Yeah,
It's
actually
that's
doing
right. Yep, no, you're good. I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry, there may be something just on the permissions of this, but again, by using that kind of derived versus the templates, it allows us to start to have the ability to adjust and change certain things based on the specific requirements of that room while maintaining all the other information. I've been doing a lot of talking, so I want to pause. Are there any questions or comments on anything that I've been discussing or saying so far? No? Okay. A couple of just in closing kind of things that we can start to take a look at too, especially as it starts to relate to construction and everything. We do have the ability to start to do things with OmniClass and the various classifications that we have, which can come in really handy if you have requirements for things such as Kobe, for example, or whatever. So you see that we have the ability to use classification systems and start to classify information. We can start to assign information related to pricing and budget that we can do. And then again, we have several reports that we can have to kind of get that information. We have ability, depending on what you're doing, to start to look at the overall category of rooms that we have in a particular project and classify them based on some grouping. And so we kind of call that as groups. And so one of the things that we typically tend to do is that we can group our rooms by a certain level. So what I can start to do here is get a subset of the rooms so I can see which rooms are on which level based on the information that we kind of have here, okay? And what I'll show you is if I go to my second floor plan right now, I can start to take a look. And in the case of this instruction, actually, no, let's look at maybe perhaps the library. This room is not actually linked. What I can do is hit link to DRofus here. And I know that my library is inside of kind of my shared administration. So I'll get that and I'll basically create that room inside of my program. So that is now there. So then if I come back now to this thing here and I do a refresh, I see that library has synced and it's now inside of here. So again, it's added it to my program and I'm getting that reported designed area here based on the geometry of that room in Revit. And then of course, by default, it would have added it overall to my project as well. So we have the ability to do that. Any of the information and parameters that we kind of have as values inside of the database, I can view. So right now, if I wanted to, you'll see that I can add, remove columns, but we can come in here and we can start to add any of the properties that are associated with a room as something that I can see here. So we can then take this and do different setups and we can save setups. So if I was perhaps looking at stuff related to just overall general areas, I may not want to see these statuses, but you can see that I can come in here and I can make changes to what the default is. So let's say that I actually start to perhaps maybe remove some of these statuses here. I can basically say a save as, and I can say this is my kind of area review layout. As an administrator, I can say that I can make this kind of shared, which means that other people in the project potentially can get it and see it and use it if they think it's feasible. I can also set what is kind of the default. And I can also kind of do that again by taking a look at the overall layout that we have for our windows. So in this case here, you'll remember that lounge room that I had actually had some photos associated with it. So if I this little tab here, you can go ahead and start to see the images that are associated with that thing there. And also if there's any documents, I can kind of get that there as well and see that there's documents associated with this particular room. So as we talk about bringing all the information in, a source of truth, we have that as something that you can do and take a look at, and again, customize to the different users on your project along with the permissions. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and see if I can open it up for questions, and I'll just ask if you mind if I'll be here, but I'm just gonna mute, change off my camera for 1 second while my girlfriend walks into my apartment. So I apologize for that. So yeah, questions?
I was just curious what other people's thoughts are as far as where they could see this like merging into their workflows. Like one of the things that comes to mind for me is we definitely have had some projects where we've had pretty involved programs that come from the client, and then we've kind of developed our own workflow just using Revit and creating additional shared parameters in Revit to try to figure out if our actual modeled room square footages are meeting the program required room square footages and all of that. And so I could see where this would help with that workflow. But I'm curious if other people on this call tonight have had similar thoughts where they're like, oh yeah, I've been doing this crazy weird workaround in Revit that this would do for me or solve for me.
Maybe not yet.
I know, I do feel like it's a lot to absorb.
Yeah, and DRofus is an extremely powerful program, but what we often see is that people start with just one portion and then they move on. So you can imagine, as you mentioned, even being able to just control and have your program as a starting point. And again, one of the things that we can do is that we can import and export to Excel. So for example, I can take a look at our database here, and I can just basically kind of do a report here, and I'll just say, I'll go down to Excel reports for rooms. And I can basically take a look at, these columns that we have here. Maybe I'll remove this one here, but I can then basically generate an Excel export, and we have that here. You have planners probably that are, Alexa, stop. Sorry about that. You have planners that are probably used to working in Excel, have that spreadsheet that they've perfected with macros over 25 years, and they hold on to like that. But if you tell them that you can get the information into Excel as a starting point, perhaps maybe eventually they'll feel comfortable. They can come in here and do their manipulation. We can use an Excel import to start your program. So you might have a program already in Excel, and we even have the ability right now, this is broken out row by row, but we can collapse it. So if we have accounting rooms, we'll add a column for quantity, and you'll say 4 accounting rooms. You'll do your departments and everything like that. We'll use that. We can import that into DRofus as your starting point so you can build it. If you wanted to, and you had a Revit model where all the rooms existed, we could use that as a starting point, import that in, and do that. And so over time, maybe you start building Excel, maybe you start building in DRofus, maybe you build in Revit. You can start to see as a validation kind of thing how we can quickly do that and how that works. One of the things that we can also do is, if I go back to Revit really quickly, let's say that I'll just come here to architecture. Let's see a family here that I know that I haven't placed in this model yet. You have a chair here. I can now come and I can basically say that I want to add this chair to my items list in DRofus. So I'll just click on this little button here and it will create it. I'll basically tell it where I want that item to go. So I'll put that under movable furnishings. And you'll notice this little button here. I can say upload family to DRofus. So what that will in essence do is take a copy of that family and put it into our DRofus database. So if you're a smaller firm, perhaps it doesn't have a content management system, and you think long-term, if you develop, we can develop a DRofus template for healthcare. And what you might do is basically take all of the families that you use typically in healthcare and put that into that template that you have. Then you now can, when people are starting a project, have the families that they need to place and go into their model and place them using that place command that I have. You could do the same thing for education or whatever. So you don't have to have a Revit template that probably has families for 6 sectors that you have, and then people are, having to delete and purge them or whatever. Again, the ability to accommodate multiple file formats and kind of use that to kind of build something that you can do as well. So depending on what you want to do and what you want to achieve, yeah, there's a lot that you can do.
I had said earlier that I was going to ask questions from the owner's perspective, so I'll
Sure.
just start firing them away.
Okay.
So what happens to the data that you are generating after project turnover? What typically happens?
So this is David. If I could, I tend to work with most of the owner clients, so I think I'll jump in a little bit. So I guess the first question is, are you an owner or are you just speaking on behalf of an owner?
I'm an owner now.
Okay. So typically the owner will actually control the data at the beginning. So they'll actually have the DRofus database. They'll input all of the data in terms of their initial requirements and what they want out of their project. Then they'll connect back with the architect. The architect will interface with it both through DRofus and Revit, but primarily through Revit. They'll come through and they'll say, okay, the owner said I'm supposed to put in, I've done healthcare, so I'm going to use that as an example. A patient bed, I need a head wall, it needs this many med gases, this many O2s, and so on. That will inform the Revit model. It'll tell the architect what they're supposed to model in their model. And then on the DRofus side, the owner can then go through and say, oh, you're actually meeting the program requirement. We're validating that you're actually doing it. Then at the end of that, they take that and then they bring the contractor on, and the contractor augments all of that information. because knowing I have a patient bed in a room doesn't do a whole lot. I need to know that it's a Hill-Rom or a Stryker, and when do I need to fix it, and how big is it, and when's the maintenance schedule, and so on. So they'll bring the contractor in, they'll augment all this information and basically put all their as-builts into these placeholders that the architect and engineers put in. And then this exact same information can then be used during operation. And that just depends on how sophisticated the owner is. If they have a CAFM system or IWMS system, we can connect directly to that, populates into it. If it's a single build construction, we usually just dump the data into it. But if it's something a little bit more sophisticated, like an airport or a hospital, where it's perpetually going through renovation, they'll usually utilize DRofus perpetually. And it will just kind of act as a spoken hub. And every new renovation, you'll just update your IWMS and your CAFM systems and so on without having to do that manual extraction from a Revit model, which usually you can't get out of a Revit model. Usually you do extraction from an Excel and then try to import it in and do it that way. But I don't know if I went too far, if that's kind of what you're looking for, but.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So that does sound like it works great for a single building. What about a campus?
It works really good for campus too. So what Joel showed you is just a project. We have multiple ways that this can work out. You could have unlimited databases. So like we work with, he mentioned Kaiser and Amazon. Well, they have thousands of buildings across campuses around the world. So they'll create multiple databases, but then inside a single database, you can have multiple projects. So let's say we have and I'm just making up two cities, the Washington, D.C. hospital and the New York City hospital. Well, they're both owned by the same owner. But in one of them, we're going to use different flooring, different window treatments, different door hardware sets because it's a different building. And we want to make sure that every new renovation, we use that. What we'll do is just create multiple projects in the same database. And so when we create our standard in the database, every new project will know, hey, it's a surgical suite, you need to use Nora flooring, not vinyl. Or, it's, VT doors versus Conair, or, whatever it may be. And so, yeah, so you can do that. And then you can have multiple databases. Essentially, we can connect it through, and this is what most clients do. They'll go instead of doing an Excel or something, they'll do like a Power BI, and then you can do dashboarding across all of your projects. You can see your entire repertoire of how many. Again, I keep using healthcare because that's the world I come from, but it's every project type there is. Obviously, Amazon doesn't do hospitals yet, and so you can go through and you can say, how many exam rooms do I have across all of my facilities and all of my different campuses? And you can do that in Power BI. And then you can click on that. You can say, okay, show me what facilities those are in, or show me where my imaging departments are, or getting down to the equipment level, show me where I have a Siemens CT scanner of this model. And then when you really start to get, depending on, again, how sophisticated the owner is and working in conjunction with the contractor, with the Power Dashboard stuff, if you have and this is like Kaiser's doing this, if you have multiple projects going on at the same time, and they know that they're going to purchase 50 exam tables for this MOB and 50 for another and 50 for another, why are they purchasing 3 purchases of a 50 when they can use purchasing power and buy 150 of them? And they can go on a report and say, okay, across all of our projects, across all of our architects, how many of these are we purchasing? And then they can start to do that kind of stuff. Yep.
And just to piggyback a little bit on what David mentioned, one of the reasons we're kind of DRofus in the web is the ability for people, as he mentioned, to be kind of doing these things. Imagine you have an iPad kind of now, and you're taking a look at your DRofus database as you're walking and checking on some of these things. One of the things that we can do is, as statuses for equipment, we can have a status that says, has this equipment been ordered? And then as soon as this gets delivered, it's delivered, and then has it been assembled? And so you as an owner can now come through and you can start to take a look at that and say, as you go through and walk the building, how has the status changed for this piece of equipment over time?
Yeah, and on that same vein, I think you saw the QR codes in one of those reports, and where those come into play. So that's actually because of the owner. When they went through, they wanted to basically put those on the signs of their buildings during occupancy. They could scan those, and they could pull up what was built in this room. What's the equipment in it? What do I have? And then they can, from their iPad, they can click on any of those pieces of equipment, pull up cut sheets for that piece of equipment, or whatever it may be. So that's we've got some clients. I can't think of it's not a hospital, it's a casino in Australia where they did that, but they did it on the equipment level. They print out QR codes for every single vital piece of MEP that they were putting in that facility. And so If something failed, they scan it. Oh, that's what it is. This is why I need to order a new one. This is, and we didn't mention this because this gets really complex in a quick demo. In DRofus, you could, everything you see here, you can do with systems as well. So electrical, mechanical, plumbing systems. And if you click on a diffuser, let's not do a diffuser because it's only one system, a thermostat, it'll tell you this thermostat is part of this electrical system. It can controls this ventilation system, and it will show you visually inside the model and on the and through the software. So it's a very large enterprise tool that you can use for very small projects, and you can use for mega projects as an owner. Everything I just told you there is like what you would use for a mega casino or Amazon or something like that. I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska. We used it for 5 years, and we didn't have a project above 25,000 square feet. That we were a little tiny boutique firm, and it made sense. We'd go through new renovations with it, so it scales quite a bit. There's a lot of stuff you can do in between.
That's great to know. One last question, drilling down into Revit a little bit. It looks like a lot of this was based on objects that are room aware. How about finishes that are on surfaces? Can you extract that out of what you have inside of a room or inside the confines of a room?
I guess it depends to what extent you're attempting to do that.
Mostly paint finishes. That's one of the things that we're running into, keeping track of what color is on the walls.
Okay, so we have two ways of doing that based on, I like to kind of describe it and think about it as in your planning phase versus your actual phase. So if we think about a template, and I'll just use this computer lab because I have this pulled up here, we might be able to, at the start of a project, just using the room data, be able to distinctly say that we'll have fields inside of that room data tab. Walls are PT1, floors are RBT2, etc. And that starts us off. As we start to get more into the overall planning, we may decide that all of a sudden we have feature walls and stuff like that or whatever. And we can actually have item lists that are related to finishes. And so at that level, we can then break that down into walls, ceilings, and floors. And we can actually create an item that is applied to the room, but it's not necessarily equated with a Revit object per se, but at least then you know if you have walls and you can have a basically a heading feature, like, you know, typical wall and then feature wall. And then those exist as items in your kind of DRofus database. You can then start to assign those to the room, and then you can track it that way. It's not necessarily going to tell you the area of that painted finish inside of the wall, but you can start to define. And so we see that clients can kind of start and set that using the room data as a qualitative early on, and then basically transition to the items in the item list eventually to kind of get more specific. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. That's perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question about interoperability because
Certainly.
It seems like it's all about the Revit database, but it sounds like what DRofus is doing is it's actually building another separate database that's in its own location. So what if we have other add-ins or other programs that are also, whether it's building another external database, or whether it's syncing with the Revit database or working off of the Revit database, or making its own? Like, how would multiple of these different programs and different solutions work together?
Sure, great question. So I guess at the first point is that we have an API. So if there are other programs and they're willing, we can do connections that way, which would be, you know, that's probably the most complicated, but then eventually if there's the investment into that, that can become the easiest if you use the API. The next way would be if we talk about, I'll use design authoring platforms. If you have a design authoring platform that can export to IFC, we can then connect to IFCs and we can pull in information. Also then to basically, same way that we exported, we have the opportunity, I'll just take rooms here for a second and say import update rooms. I can choose an Excel file. And as long as I have the structure of that Excel file in a way that I can map it to DRofus, if I can get an Excel, I can import information in. So whether that information is related to rooms, it's related to items, if I can get it out of that format into Excel, probably maybe I'll have to do a little tweaking, but I can then eventually get it into DRofus via that Excel import. So 3 different ways to do that.
That's great. Do you have any examples of other programs that you've worked with clients to have those kinds of relationships or workflows developed with them? Like I don't know, I'm just throwing out some things. Like Newforma is one that I know a lot of people are using, or some of the programs that contractors are using for CA and RFIs and submittals, like Co-Construct and what are some of the others? I'm just
Procore,
like
eBuilder.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So we don't have a direct plugin to any of those, but we do have multiple clients that use us with those. That is quite common. Like I just because they're projects that I'm on, I know that Amazon, or sorry, not Amazon, sorry, Kaiser is using us with eBuilder, right? And I know that we've used Walsh Construction does Procore, so it's possible. You can definitely connect them.
Okay. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Any other questions or comments? Right. Well, hopefully you've learned something today and you found this useful. It's a lot of information, as you said, but as you continue to think about this after the fact, if there's potential applications of this that you have or questions, Bethany, so you can make my email address available to everybody that was a part of the list today. Please do reach out with any questions you have, and we'd be happy to answer them and further dig in into kind of how we do this. One thing I'll just show really quickly as kind of parting, kind of went to, some of the things that we have here, but this is where we can start to take a look at control our source of truth about where information comes and goes. So in essence, you can see that we have basically the parameters and properties that are associated in our DRofus database versus the properties that exist inside of the Revit model. And this is where we can start to say, I want to push information from the Revit model into DRofus, or conversely, if I wanted to, I can take information that is from DRofus and push it into the Revit model and start to kind of build these maps. And so again, for the different the different consultants and disciplines that are on your project, they can each have this, because the interior designer might be concerned about a totally different set of information than the planner, than the electrical engineer, than the structural engineer. And so this is how we can kind of control that too. So to your earlier point about getting the information in and everything from a Revit perspective, that's kind of how we control that. And the same way that we do that for rooms, you can then do that for items as well.
Thank you. And I put your email address in the chat too, if anyone wants to copy and paste that out real quick before we finish up. But I will be sending out a follow-up email, so I'll make sure to include that in the email as well.
Right. All right.
Thank
well,
you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you very much. Take care and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you,
Bye.
David.
Bye.
Take care.